I lived very close to my grandparents, who I was very close to, and I remember riding my bike down to their house often, and my grandmother and grandfather took a lot of interest in me and helped me kind of grow up. My grandmother always gave me this power to do whatever I wanted to do, and she used to encourage me and tell me, hey, you can do anything you want to do if you try, and most of the times you'll be successful. So she was always very encouraging, and I really give them credit for, a lot of who I am today is because of them. I got the idea in my head that I would be a doctor. So even my high school days and through junior high, I was going to be a doctor. After high school, I went to Miami University, and I entered Miami as a very shy, really a big nerd. I was the first one in my family to go to college, so there was nobody to follow. But I was lucky to find this group of guys that we palled around together and we teamed up. When I was a freshman, I lived with this group. When I was a sophomore, there was a few of us that lived together. The same thing as juniors, and then as seniors, we got together and rented a house. We named it the Tool Shed. And those guys really taught me how to kind of get out of my shell. They acted as my mentors all through school. So I entered as a shy nerd, and I exited as somebody who wasn't shy, who was really outgoing, and I was ready for the world. And by the time I was a senior, I decided I just didn't want to go to school anymore. I'd had enough of school. And there was no one thing that made me change my mind, except that I had to pay my own way through college, and it was tough. And I think I was just wore out, and I didn't want to go to school anymore. So after I graduated with that degree in zoology, I went back home, and I knew I needed to do something. My family wasn't the kind where you could just sit around or lay around. You were doing something. So either you're going to school or you're working. I had a mentor at Christ Hospital, where I was working at the time, and she really encouraged me to find a job and to use that zoology degree, in a bigger way. So I just picked a job out of the newspaper and applied for a job as a lab assistant. And she actually wrote my resume, helped me write a resume, and then typed it for me because I didn't have access to a typewriter. And she really, really pushed me to look for a job. So I really gave her a lot of credit, and still do, for getting me started in this industry. I went to the interview at a place called Freeze and Freeze, which is now called Givaudan, and it's the #1 flavor company in the whole world. And I showed up at this interview, and I really didn't know what they did at this company. And they had me taste some samples that were there, and I found out that I was a super taster. So other than washing beakers and doing things as a lab assistant, they put me on a fast track to learn how to identify flavor chemicals and how to build flavors. For me, it was like a kid in a candy store. I saw all of those flavor chemicals on the wall and thought, wow, I'm going to be able to do all kinds of things in this place, and it was really exciting. I worked with a flavor chemist named George Long, and he had me taste and smell all of these individual flavor chemicals that, when put together, you make flavors out of. And he was intent on me learning all of these flavor chemicals that I saw on this, gigantic wall of building blocks. And I was just good at it. I could taste these flavor chemicals and smell them, and I could remember them. And then I got tapped to go work in the beverage lab for Jim Moon, who was very well respected in the beverage industry. And on that job, I learned how to take those flavors that were already made and work them into a beverage. One of the beverages I developed while I was at Freeze and Freeze was called California Cooler. And it was actually the very first wine cooler developed in the US. And it was a couple of guys, entrepreneurs out in California that had made this product in their bathtub, and they were trying to commercialize it. So I worked with Jim Moon and the rest of the beverage lab, and we developed the original California coolers. As it turned out, Brown-Forman, located here in Louisville, Kentucky, bought that entire brand. I received a phone call from a lady named Susan Lehman, and she was the recruiter at Brown-Forman. And she wanted me to come to work at Brown-Forman. I was happy in Cincinnati at Freeze and Freeze, and I wasn't interested at all. But she didn't stop. But I started getting letters and cards, and finally it was a bit irritating, so I told her that I would come down and interview, but I did not want to talk to the people in the laboratory because they were a customer of Freeze and Freeze. And I was afraid that if my boss heard that I was interviewing for a job, that because of the secrecy of this kind of work, he'd fire me. So I came to Louisville and I interviewed with other people at Brown-Forman. And I remember thinking, man, this is not the place for me. She had me interview with some high-level executives, and they were all older. And in fact, I laugh now because they were probably my age today, but when I was 25 or 26, they seemed very old. So I told her I wasn't interested, and I told her why. And she got a little irritated with me because she said, you know, you didn't want to talk with the people in the lab, so I had you talk with other people. But we do have young people who work here. And so I said, okay, and she had me come back and talk with two marketing folks. One of them, his name is Scott Reed, who's now a friend of mine still today after all these years. But he was about my age, and I thought he's really cool.
I've known Dave since actually the early 90s. So when Dave interviewed at Brown-Forman, I was running new products for Jack Daniels down in Nashville. Dave and I both had dark hair, and we were in our late 20s.
And at the time I was making $27,000, which was really good in those days, especially for a new graduate. I was doing very well. And she said, what is my salary range? And so I just thought real quick. So I just doubled it because I still didn't really want the job. So I said, well, I can't leave Freeze and Freeze for less than $54,000. And she goes, that's a good number, that's in our range, so I'll get back with you. So, you know, the end of the story is of course I took that job. It turned out to be a very, very good move for me, although I came to Louisville kicking and screaming. And when I joined Brown-Forman, my very first project, I had a lot of small projects, but my very first major project was developing the Jack Daniels Country Cocktails. So they were little ready-to-drink cocktails, about 14 proof, using Jack Daniels whiskey.
We had this fabulous umbrella called Jack Daniels, and the whole concept was, how do we attract new users to the franchise? And that was through different audiences, mainly attracting more women, and then also new occasions like day parts, so picnics, festivals, concerts, etc.
There was a whole team, but my responsibility was to build and develop what went into those bottles. And so I developed a Lynchburg lemonade, a down home punch, a Tennessee tea. There was a whole line of them. And I become like a rock star, like a junior rock star at Brown-Forman. I mean, it was the brand did well. I was young, energetic, you know, I'd go to all these productions, and I loved it. It was very exciting.
Those products have, I think, withstood the test of time because they've migrated not only in size formats, but also product bases. So I know that Dave and I worked together not only developing the spirit-based line of products, but also in parallel, a malt-based version of the Country Cocktails line. And at the time, the company just wasn't ready to market a malt-based product under the Jack Daniels umbrella. So we put that on hold knowing that that's where the market was.
I remember the first time that I saw them on the store shelf in a local store, and I walked down the aisle and I could see them out there, and I just stopped and I thought, you know, I did those. I made those, and I stood right in that store and cried. Then they gave me some other projects, and one of I had lots of them, but I think the most impact I had while I was there was I figured out ways in which to re-engineer some of their formulations, some of their whiskey formulations, so that they could save millions of dollars. But the products would taste exactly the same. It was really just a re-engineering. And over time, you know, as I did more and more projects and I was more and more successful, the job became less and less fun for me. I just kind of lost interest in it.